My name is Jane Regan, and I serve the School of Theology and Ministry as Director of Continuing Education, as well as Assistant Professor of Theology, English Education. It's pleased to be here with you and to spend the day looking at wise and holy women of Lent. You'll find more information about the School of Theology and Ministry on the back table, and be sure to take a look at, excuse me, our summer brochure and our continuing ed material for the rest of the spring and into the summer. As part of the summer STM program, Brother Mickey will be back, yay, offering a one-week course, which is Monday through Thursday night, 6 to 9, at the STM, which is over on the Brighton campus. And it'll be looking at the same topic, expanding on some of the elements that he developed for us today. The dates are July 23rd to 26th. And one of the elements of Boston College, as you know, tuition at Boston College is not inexpensive. But one of the things, in part because of the dedication of Boston College to ministers in the vicinity, if you're a minister in the vicinity or a retired minister in the vicinity or know a minister in the vicinity, you're able to audit the course for $100. So it's a real opportunity to go in depth on some of the things that we just touch on today and to get to spend a whole week with Mickey McGrath, which is really like worth $100, okay? So anyway, that's coming up, and there are brochures on the back which include the link that you need, but registration doesn't open till April 5th, okay? And there won't be a cap on the course, but I would register, if you're interested in going, I'd register sooner rather than later, okay? But registration doesn't open till April 5th, okay. We also have a number of on-campus free presentations that are coming up, and those you can find in this brochure. So we have a couple more coming up that are very, really exciting, that we're really looking forward to. Today, you're in for a real treat, an early Lent journey, and some of our favorite women saints brought to life by someone whose life work is that of bringing beauty, inspiration, and illumination to the people of God. Brother Mickey McGrath is an oblate of St. Francis de Sales for 40 years. He's an artist, a writer, a speaker, whose message is always about the healing power of art and its ability to lead to light and grace. He began drawing at the age of 4 underneath his mother's ironing board in their Philadelphia home.
I was born in a log cabin in a...
He walked to school uphill both ways. As a child, he drew cartoons during recess, and now he spends up to 8 hours a day drawing and painting in his studio in South Camden, New Jersey, where he finds beauty in the margins and creates works of art that flourish in the context of social justice. Brother Mickey holds a degree in art from Moravian College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and a Master's of Fine Art in Painting from the American University in Washington. Every summer since 1987, Brother Mickey has taught at the Grunwald Guild, an interfaith art community in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, which offers a week-long course in any number of art disciplines. For 11 years, Mickey served as Associate Professor of Studio Art and Art History at DeSales University. Then in 1994, he transitioned into working full-time as an artist who leads retreats, creates books, leads art tours, and gives presentations. About that transition, he said, "Boy, I didn't see that coming, but you never know where the Holy Spirit is going to lead you, and her plans always work out better than anything I could do left to my own devices." Brother Mickey's work and ministry have been featured in St. Anthony's Messenger, USA Today, America Magazine, and in many Catholic newspapers around the country. Mickey is a prolific creator of published books of art. He has received numerous honors. Now, these honors I'm about to mention are all that he received in 2017 alone. but since we want to hear from Mickey, I can only do 1 year, okay? He received the Catholic Press Association Award for Be Who You Are, The Spirit of St. Francis de Sales in Words and Illumination from Clear Feth Publishing House, the Moonbeam Book Award and the Illumination Award for Adult Coloring Books, Drawing Closer to God, Coloring Meditations for Your Spiritual Journey from the World Library publication, and the 2018 Illumination Award for Our Common Home, Visual Meditations on Pope Francis' encyclical Laudate Si from World Library Publications. You'll find these and some other titles of his on sale at the 20% off discount from Boston College Bookstore. The patron saint of Brother Mickey's congregation, St. Francis de Sales, famously said, "Be who you are and be that perfectly well." Today, we are here in the company of a person who lives out that message. He knows who he is, and he does that perfectly well. So please welcome Mickey.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Now, of all those wonderful things Jane just said, I'm fixated on you can audit the course for only $100. Does that come out of my salary, that reduction? I'm very excited to be here, and thank you to Melinda, not only for inviting me in the first place, but alerting me to weather patterns, which I'm clueless about until somebody down home said the other morning, at morning prayer, the two guys I live with said, we were expecting some rain on Friday. And I thought, yeah, big deal, rain, Then the next thing, I got an email from Melinda, and I thought, I better get up there early. So I came up and have been staying with my dear friend Susan Kay, who I know many of you know, and glad I did. It's been great to be here. And about the course, I'll just get the shameless huckstering out of the way because I'll forget to do it later. But the course that I will be teaching this summer is one I taught last summer at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. And I didn't tell them, but I was just thinking of them as the warm-up act for Boston College. But it will center on the 4 women doctors of the church. And the subtitle is, it's called Wise and Holy Women and a Few Good Men. So, and here they are. We got a couple of them right here. So I link up the women doctors with their male counterparts and influences. So I hope we see some of you here. It'll be a good time in the Lord, as Sister Thea Bowman used to say. Well, I love to start off my talks either with Francis de Sales or Pope Francis. And so here we are. It just seemed a perfect opportunity today, given our recent weather situations. But I love this quote, and it's something the Pope said a couple years ago in the spring season in Lent, that no matter what's going on, and there's certainly a lot going on in there in our world, the anxiety level of people is palpable when I go out and speak. Not only because of our country, but the church is in a real mess too, It's like mess everywhere you look. But we're all in this together, or we wouldn't have had this many people come out on a Saturday morning, that we're all moving forward. We just can't stay stuck. And that's the bottom line of everything I share, I think, is find your true self and just get out there. As I look around the crowd, I see that we're all in the, what we would say, the second half of life. In fact, since almost all my audiences are like this these days, I've designed a new program called The Silver Saints. And I'm starting it in Advent, because look at the Advent stories. They're all filled with Anna and Joachim and Anna and Simeon and Elizabeth and Zechariah, all the wise figures, wisdom figures. And that's how we look at it. And that's their signs, their other signs of resurrection springing up. We can't cave into despair and fear. And I think that's why we are in the state we're in, especially in our country, that people are choosing fear instead of love, fear of the other. And that's largely what we'll be seeing today. So I put this one in because of our storm. This painting is called Rock of Ages, and it shows Jesus just being the rock in the midst of the storm. There he was. Remember that story where he just got all peopled out? You know how that is. And he says to the apostles, let's go across the lake, and kind of like, let's hop in the car and just go for a little ride. And so halfway out in the lake, a big terrible storm breaks out. And everybody's in a panic except Jesus, who was still taking a nap, very undisturbed. And that's what inspired this picture here, that no matter what storms are raging in our lives, just go to the rock and all will be well. And we just, it always has been in the past. St. Francis de Sales used to say, do not worry about tomorrow. The same loving God who watched over you yesterday is going to be there tomorrow. So live for today. That's all we have. That's all we're guaranteed, the right here and now. So the other thing that inspired this painting was my favorite hymn. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. If love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? Now, of course, you notice the guy in the back of the boat's throwing up. Bet you never saw that in the holy icon before, huh? Well, you didn't think I was going to come up here and not rub it in your faces, being from Philly. This got a lot of views when I posted it on my Facebook page about several weeks ago. And it was my Christmas card this year, but I kind of doctored it up a little bit to go with the flow of the season. I recently learned this line from the poet Rumi. I've learned that every mortal will taste death, but only some will taste life. Isn't that something? Isn't that beautiful? The poet Rumi, if you're not familiar, there's a big surge of interest in him in these past years. He was a Sufi back in the 1400s, I think he lived. But he also wrote, he must have had some Christian mystic friends, because he wrote, every man and woman is Mary bearing Christ into the world. And that's a large part of what we're going to be seeing today, too, this whole sense, the broadening sense of the feminine divine and the feminine energy of God, that it's kind of like our time has come, to open up the wholeness of God and not stay fixated on one aspect of him. That is right out of an interview that Mother Teresa gave to Dan Rather on 60 Minutes, I don't know how many years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And I just love that, because that wraps up contemplative prayer right there in a nutshell. It's no different. It's just being still, and none of us knows how to listen anymore, to just sit still and listen. I just read a book, or halfway through the book. A friend lent it to me, and I had to return it before I finished it. So I tried to sneak it into my luggage, but he caught me. But it's called Silence in an Age of Noise. And it's not written by a religious man at all. It's a Norwegian guy who walked to the South Pole and the North Pole and climbed Mount Everest. He's the only human in history that did all three of those things. But the whole point was to touch base with silence, to get out of the constant noise and distraction of our world and phones and texting and all that stuff. And it's a beautiful, beautiful little book. And he talks about raising his 3 teenage daughters and how they just don't get it. They think he's crazy. Well, he is a little crazy, I guess. But it's just, I think that's our greatest need. And I say it to groups, no matter the age these days, that we're not touching base with our prayerful, contemplative selves at all. But that's where we're going to hear the silent voice of God who's in there. Come on, it's going to be okay. But when we get all caught up in our stuff, Francis de Sales used to say, the only thing worse for the human soul than sin is stress and anxiety. He said that in 1615. We think we invented stress and anxiety in our age, but that was his biggest thing. And to be patient with yourself more than anything else. Life's a journey, and, one step at a time, and you get there, Be who you are. Teilhard, in a more contemporary note, said this: we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that makes sense to us today in the modern age. It's all what we're going to emphasize and really see the spirituality of ourselves. There's such hunger for it. We live in this age where more people than ever identify as spiritual but not religious. They even have a category, the nuns, right? N-O-N-E-S, because they check none on the survey where it says religious affiliation. And so we're going to look at that today too. But what scares me more than the spiritual but not religious crowd is the religious but not spiritual crowd. They're much scarier, you know? I had a woman come up to me last year after a talk, and she said, "Oh, could you recommend," I had all my books and prints out, and recommend a gift I can get. She said, "My girlfriend's son just got ordained a priest, a young guy." And so I was starting to think of what would be good as an ordination gift. And then she interjected, "But he's not very spiritual." And I laughed like you just did, but then I thought, this isn't funny. You know, it struck me so funny to think, a priest not spiritual, but sadly that's too true of a lot of people deep in religious circles. They're not, you know, they're all about the old ways. Francis de Sales put it this way: theology tends to the knowledge of God, mysticism to the love of God. Now, Francis was on to something way back when. He was a doctor of the church and a bishop. He was a canon lawyer and a civil lawyer. But none of that came before people's hearts. He said that's where God dwells, right in the heart, in our story, in our relationships and friendships. He and his friend, St. James de Chantal, are sometimes called the patron saints of friendship. Because he said that's where we come to know God. Not in the laws and the rules and the regulations, that's a part of things. What we would say in the world today, the left brain, which when I was teaching studio art class at DeSales University years ago, I started off. It was really big then in the 80s. Drawing on the right side of the brain had just come out, and it's the Bible, I think, to this day, about our artistic selves and creative self comes from a different part of our brain that our culture hasn't always cultivated, and church especially. We've always been big on the left brain, and how you remember what side of the brain that is. Think of all the L words: legalism, legalistic, linear, logical. All those L words come from the left side of our brains. Loony. And the right side, think romance. That's the only R one I can come up with that fits. But in any event, you see what I'm getting at. And so the church has always been, until Vatican II, more trying to push that left side, and that it's all about logical and linear and law. And the thing is, if you set up church that way, then you got to do something with people that break the laws. And then what's that mean? And is there, if everybody condemn, all that stuff when you get caught up there. Whereas if you look at the heart, that's where our stories are, our memories, our interactions with each other, where love comes from. That's not a bad L word, is it? So Francis de Sales always loved to look at the mystics. One of his favorite people, as we'll see in the summer course, was Teresa of Avila, whose goal in life was to bring spirituality to the common person. That's what Francis de Sales was all about. He said, no matter what your vocation is, you have a relationship with God. He said, whether you're a soldier, a prince, a housewife, or a baker, and that God enters the details of your particular relationship. There's no one covering. Now, he loved the Jesuits. He would love Ignatius, and he did a 30-day retreat twice in his life. And so he was all about Ignatian spirituality. But he felt there's not one thing that fits everybody, that we kind of design our own spiritual programs. And he used to say, it's a good thing to pray for a half an hour every morning. Unless you're in a time of stress and anxiety, then you should pray for an hour, which seems counter. We all have those mornings when you don't know where to start. You have so much on your plate. But the best thing to do is just calm down and sip your coffee or tea and be grateful, because all healing begins with a grateful heart. Meister Eckhart, if you never say any prayer in your whole life but thank you, that would be sufficient. So, and that would all come out of this right brain, the mystics, the women who saw God and Jesus specifically through the personal, relational. Catherine of Siena writing about flesh and blood and milk, mother's milk, and all those things, not the Aquinas kind of theology lineup, But even Aquinas, in his last years, lost his voice. He looked back on his life and he realized everything I've written He said, direct quote, is as worthless as straw. I don't know God any better today than I did when I started writing, because God's not this intellectual black and white concept that many would love to have, that many cling to in fear. If you're locked into that black and white world, you're afraid of change. You want to keep things exactly as they are because that's where your security comes from, the familiar. But if you're locked into the other side and you realize life ain't black and white, that there's a lot of beautiful color and shades of gray. I'd say 50 Shades of Gray, but that's a dirty book, so. But between black and white, there's a whole lot of stuff that God has given us as gift. And we don't honor that when we try to lock ourselves into just one way of doing it. Tradition's supposed to be a living, breathing, moving thing, not keep us stuck. I'm giving the whole thing out in this initial opening. But here's my new favorite quote. There are two Catholic churches, one a noun, the other a verb, one a corporation, and the other a wild idea held in the hearts of millions of people who are utterly disinterested in authority and power and rules and regulations, and very interested indeed in finding ways to walk through the bruises of life with grace and humility. Is that not beautiful? That wraps it all up, and I think that's the conundrum for all of us today. That was written by Brian Doyle. I don't know if any of you know that wonderful writer. He just died in November, and this is from his book that wasn't published till after his death. He was only 60 years old, died of cancer, but he was the editor of Portland Magazine, which was a Catholic literary journal. And I have two of his books at home. He wrote many more than that, but a lot of essays. And he wrote them as a Catholic husband and father and religious educator and publisher of this very important journal. I mean, he mingled with the best writers out there. And so he was on all planes, and this was his approach to the church that he loved and that he always wrote about, and how we get to know God through that filter. This I just created the other day, too, said by a bishop in Australia who's recently been appointed. He's a Vietnamese man named Bishop Vincent Van Nguyen. But he said on the day he was ordained a bishop, the new wine of God's unconditional love, boundless mercy, radical inclusivity, and equality needs to be poured into new wineskins of humility, mutuality, compassion, and powerlessness. The old wineskins of triumphalism, authoritarianism, and supremacy, abetted by clerical power, superiority, and rigidity, are breaking. This from a bishop. You know, there's a new sheriff in Dodge, you may have heard. So this is how things are gradually shifting and changing. Well, I was a novice in the Oblates back in 1976. And I remember at that time, our novice director, so Vatican II was only over 10 years at that point, right? Our novice director, Bill Gallagher, said to us, it's going to take at least 2 generations before all this really starts taking effect. And here we are, 50 years later. And I thought, what a prophet that man was, you know, that he really knew the pulse and how long it takes for things to filter down. Even in this age of quick technology and instant facts and all that stuff, we're still just starting to get it. So what we're seeing is this tension between the people clinging to the old and not wanting, desperately clinging in some cases, and those who can't wait for the new to get here fast enough, and that's that tension between the two that we're living with right now, I think, And again, the fear, let's circle the wagons and hold out all the newness and the change. But if we come to see the Holy Spirit as the same guide that's guided us this far, it all works out so much better, doesn't it? A couple of years ago, Pope Francis spoke to 2,500 lay ministers, such as yourselves, at the Florence Cathedral. Can you imagine a better setting, all that beautiful art and Pope Francis to boot? And he gave a talk for 40 minutes, and it was interrupted, I read, 20 times by standing ovations and cheers. And in it, he put down clerical superiority and clericalism. And one of the other lines that he said during that speech was, people who are clinging to conservatism in the church are clinging to the very things that created the problems we're facing today in the first place. That's why we're in the mess we are, people unwilling to change and move forward, you know. So he's brilliant. And this was my favorite line of all time that he said, we're not living in an era of change, we're living in a change of era. And that's powerful, powerful stuff. And as soon as I read that, I thought, this is why we are in the midst of something that we don't know what's on the other end. All we can do is stand still, not mind our own business, but just be who you are and be that well and trust that, you know, we all have a job to do and we're all in this together. And we're here to walk and support each other, walk with and support each other, not be at loggerheads with each other all the time. And there's too much of that, isn't there? So we are 500 years from the Protestant Reformation. 500 years before that was when the East and the Western churches split. And we had all those people killing each other over icons, you know. And the Protestant Reformation, everybody thought it was the end of the world, and it doesn't get worse than this. And but here we are. And for the most part, we've worked that out, haven't we? You know, we realized it doesn't matter what denomination you are. We're all heading on the same journey, taking different paths, but we're working together here. And thank you, Vatican II. You know, that kind of put us in that new mindset. So I think this new age of reform, what do I know? But it seems to me it's about the crowd that wasn't part of the Protestant Reformation. It's women and gay people and people in the margins, people of color who have been way too long marginalized. And it's kind of like we're taking new looks at that and bringing that into the lifeblood of the church. And I'm firmly convinced that's what it is. If you look at the secular world, look at the Me Too movement. It's happening. And you know, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, there's no going back. And so that's where I get my hope. It's like I want to be part of whatever's happening, not resist it. You know, resisting it doesn't get you anywhere. Teresa of Avila said the important thing is not to think much, but to love much, and to do that which stirs us to love. And Thomas Merton, boy, you can't go wrong with him either, huh? If we could let go of our own obsession with what we think is the meaning of it all, forget ourselves on purpose, cast our awful solemnity to the winds, and join in the general dance of Sophia at play in the garden of the Lord. Now, back in the 60s, Thomas Merton started praying to Sophia, which was his word for the Holy Spirit. And he's the one of the people helping us starting to look at the feminine nature of God. That if we want to look at the wholeness of God, we have to realize that God is mother as well as father. And that there's a whole other dimension of divinity that we've been neglecting, and that we need the power of in this modern world that's changing so fast we can't keep up with it. It's the maternal, the giving new life, the womb of God. And Thomas Merton devoted his life to that. He wrote a book called Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom, to talk about this feminine God. And he would do paintings, not every morning, but very frequently for his morning meditations. He took a Japanese bamboo brush and dipped it in ink and drew, usually they were abstract, but sometimes they were the face of Mary or Jesus, but just loose, holding the brush at the end and loosening up, all out of the Japanese brush calligraphy tradition. He was so interested, as you know, in finding the connections beneath the surface of all the world's religions, and see we're all connected. We're all one human family, all made in the image and likeness of God. And Vatican II was coming along right as he's doing all this and saying, you don't have to be a baptized Catholic to get saved anymore, you know? Remember Pope Francis said that a few years ago. He said, even atheists are saved. Well, that got him in all kinds of hot water. And then I love the crowd that remember he told his little 10-year-old boy, your puppy will be in heaven. What do you say to a 10-year-old kid? Well, all the theologians were all over him for that too. It's like, lighten up. Nobody lightens up anymore. That's the problem. A lot of people take church entirely too seriously as far as I'm concerned. So we need a church capable of rediscovering the maternal womb of mercy. Beautiful, beautiful line. It's from Evangelii Gaudium. And it's just about this whole, in this new world of ours, this change of era, we got to start looking at this other aspect of God that's for too long been ignored, the maternal caring side. Jesus breaks through the boring categories to which we try to limit him. And don't we do that? Especially some of our more fundamentalist brothers and sisters who see every storm like last night as punishment for God knows what, this awful punishing, condemning God, it's like, grow up. That's what I'm always telling people, grow up. That might be nice when you're 10 and learning about God and you need rules and structure up through college years. But, it comes to a point, let go of all of that. That's not what God wants us to be. God desires our freedom more than anything else. I always loved to share, until I was in my 40s, I used to walk into a situation such as this, a room full of strangers, and my thought would be, oh, I wonder if these people are going to like me. And then somewhere in my 40s, I realized I was walking into the room and saying, I wonder if I'm going to like these people. And I like it a whole lot better on this side, Comes a time in life, what you see is what you get. And I learned that from Thea Bowman. She used to say that all the time. It's like, this is it. God loves me no matter what my failings and weaknesses and sins. You sin on Sunday, you get up on Monday and start all over again. Ours is a God of unlimited chances. And if you, I said this to a group, I did a communion breakfast in Virginia right before Christmas. And I said that I was all riled about something in the news. Doesn't matter what it was, but I have a lot of screaming at the radio moments these days. But in any event, that morning I said to this crowd, if you think that all there is to being Catholic is showing up at Mass every Sunday and voting against abortion and not liking gay people, then don't come. That's not why we're in that communion line together. I said, but make sure you still send your envelope. It was Stewardship Sunday, and I didn't want to get in trouble with the pastor, who is my dear friend. But it's true. I kind of feel that way. When I'm standing in the communion line next to somebody, I'm not worried about their life. We, in the church, that left brain crowd, that L crowd, gets more worked up on who shouldn't be coming to communion instead of who should, which, as far as I'm concerned, is everybody. I get the whole RCI, all that, I'm not saying. But, I always tell the guys, if at my funeral they make the announcement, only Catholics in good standing may come to communion. If you're not Catholic, just stand. I want everybody to go to communion at my funeral. I say, I will come back and haunt you forever. If that is said. That would never be said at an oblate funeral, by the way. But I'm just making the point that we do go out of our way sometimes to distance people, to make them not feel welcome. And then we wonder, why isn't anybody coming to church anymore? It's like, yeah, I'll tell you. If I'm at a parish where I don't hear I don't go back there. Find another place. Don't leave the church. I'm always saying that to people, don't leave the church. Nobody loves the church more than I wouldn't be standing here 42 years later in the Oblates. It's not a matter of leaving if I don't like something that's going on. I'd say, stay and be annoying. And that's my approach. Don't desert us. We all need that. We're all in this together, You got a kick out of that. So, and I really think that's what Jesus is trying to free me, let me out of here. I did a picture, I'm not showing it today, but of Pope John the 23rd letting the dove, the Holy Spirit, out of a cage. Because that's exactly what it was about, wasn't it? Just broadening our sense of where God is, which is everywhere in this big, beautiful cosmos, and in the cosmos that's right here as well. So, because this is the women of the Lenten season, I want to start off with these two good friends of Jesus, Mary and Martha. And this was one of two times in the Gospels that it tells us Jesus wept. And the one was when when Lazarus died. I remember Martha greeted him, if you had been here yesterday, this wouldn't have happened, And it says Jesus wept. The other time was when he looked out at the crowd and felt such pity and compassion for them, and he wept. So this painting was inspired by a very dear friend of mine. His name was Eric, who was an oblate, and he was killed in a car wreck just after leaving dinner with the bishop who was going to ordain him 3 months later. This was about 10 years ago, and it was just 2 weeks before his 35th birthday. And there I was at his viewing, He was a great guy. Everybody loved him, salt of the earth kind of guy. And at his viewing, I was hugging his two sisters by his coffin. And that's where the idea for this painting came. It immediately came to mind that I'm with Mary and Martha, crying over the death of my friend. And it brought Scripture into a whole new reality. And it's what I always try to do, but I remember distinctly here that if we just keep Scripture as, that's a nice thing Jesus did 2,000 years ago, it means nothing. We have to find it's woven into our own stories. So ever since that night, at Eric's funeral, the viewing before his funeral, I've loved Mary and Martha in a new way that I never knew them before. It brought them to life, and Jesus in a new and very human way, that he had a broken heart. Are you all familiar with Jean Vanier, and the founder of the L'Arche movement? He teaches that, this is a sideline, but that Lazarus was probably a mentally challenged man, because in his culture, that would be what explains two sisters not marrying, that they stayed home to take care of their mentally challenged brother. And I love that if it's true, because that also explains why Jesus loved him even more. If you want to look for Jesus, you're going to look in the margins and where the women were. And that's why I'm talking about this new age of reform. Now that we're looking at the gospel, breathing new life into it, that's where Jesus was, and that's where Pope Francis is trying to direct us, and where most of us want to be. It's like reaching out to the margins and realize there's a lot to learn there. It's not about us doing for them, but learning from, that we're all in this together. So up top it says, Vita mutator non toliter, which is Latin from the funeral rite, and says, life is changed, not ended. So, this past September, I ran a trip. You heard that in the bio. Lately, I've been running trips. And we started, it was all across southern France. And they're educational pilgrimages, although I don't advertise it that way, because I don't want that. Some people are attracted to pilgrimage are that cranky type I talked about before. And who wants to go across southern France with cranks, right? So we started our trip outside Nice, where there's a beautiful little chapel that I've been researching for years and years that Henri Matisse, the great French master, designed when he was 80 years old with the help of a young Dominican nun. And it's one of the first modern chapels, and you can visit it. It's a beautiful thing. I wish we could do a whole 2 morning on that whole thing, because I have a ton of stories and pictures. But then we ended in Montserrat to be with the Black Madonna, where St. Ignatius had his conversion experience. If you've ever been there, it's beautiful. And the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, Gaudi's. But right in the middle, we went through Van Gogh country, and we spent 3 nights in Saint Remy, where Van Gogh was in the insane institution. I don't know, what do we call them today, but there he was. So Mary and Martha both lived in that area where Van Gogh was. You didn't know that, did you? Wonderful stories. And what it is that after, the legends had it, that after the Ascension, Mary Magdalene and Martha and Lazarus and another guy named Saint Maximine all got in a boat with assorted other people, depending on the story. There were any number of them. But while they were at sea, the rudder broke and the sails fell down. And they prayed to the Holy Spirit, wherever the boat lands is where you want us to be, to preach the gospel. So the boat landed on the southern shores of France, Gaul, as it was called then. And there's a town there to this day, the town of the Maries, where the boat landed. It's right next to Cannes, where the big film festival is, right? And near Arles, where Van Gogh hung out. So it's all in this beautiful area, mountainous area. And we'll look at the 2 women and what came of them. Mary Magdalene went her way, and Martha went hers. And Lazarus, according to that story, became the first bishop of Marseille. So France and early Gaul was steeped in this post-resurrection Christianity, and the stories. So here they are in the boat. Mary Magdalene's on the left, Martha's on the right, Lazarus is in there, and then look at the next row. It's Vincent van Gogh and Henri Matisse. And up top's Our Lady of Montserrat, the Black Madonna of Montserrat. So I created and then sent it. Everybody who came on the trip had one of these ahead of time to kind of, as our holy guard for the trip. So here's where Mary Magdalene went. We climbed this hill. About 8 people couldn't because it was pretty arduous. I didn't realize when we planned this how tough the climate would be. But Mary Magdalene lived in a cave that's at the top of this, almost at the top of the mountain. Way up top, you see that other little, that's also where she used to hang out, apparently. They built a shrine over it now. But for the last 8 years of her life, according to the legends, Mary Magdalene lived in that cave as a contemplative. After spending her years bringing Christianity to Gaul, this was her place of retirement and rest. And we climbed up that hill. It's a switchback. It was paved, so it wasn't, we didn't have to have machetes to. I guess she did probably, but we didn't. And we did switchback and very, very steep. And you just want to die by the time you get up top. And as you get closer and closer, you can see little hints of what's to come. So after all that climbing, and it took me about 45 minutes, what's waiting for you? 120 steps. And what was waiting at the top of the steps, there's this crucifixion greeting you with Mary Magdalene, of course. You enter the cave. But what was waiting for us at the top step was this recently ordained Dominican priest who was going to celebrate Mass for us. And he said, now I want you all to remember that the whole idea of pilgrimage is not to inflict pain on yourselves. And I was like, I didn't see you climbing up that hill just now in your little white habit there. In fact, he pointed out the Land Rover that he drives up there in every day. So anyhow, inside is this beautiful cave with different areas of shrines set up. It's really wonderful. And here you are in the womb of the earth. So what this was about for Mary Magdalene, she set the tone, the desert fathers and mothers, and then later Francis of Assisi, St. Kevin over in Glendalough in Ireland, they all lived in caves for a while, or at least visited them for prayer. And the whole idea was this return to Mother Earth, to the origins, to the womb, where God began creation. Wonderful stuff, isn't it? And that's what's coming back into our world today in this time of change and reform. It's taking a fresh look, taking the old traditions, not getting rid of them, just helping us see them with new eyes. It's kind of like, that's how you know the Holy Spirit's at work in your life. When you look at something that you have seen all your life, but it's like you're looking at it for the first time, because you've grown and matured, and it's like you're a different you than when you first learned something, right? And so that's God at work. And that's something not to be afraid of, but to celebrate, to look for. And that's what Mary Magdalene did in this cave. So we had Mass in there, and while Mass was going on, I sketched. I knew what was going on, but it was all in French, so. So I sketched, but it was great. You look at the altar one way, and then out the door, and it was like all of France was out there. The mountains and valleys, just this beautiful view. You're so high up. And it was like the cosmos and the cave all in one setting, and you just had a sense of the holy. Now, did Mary Magdalene really spend her last year? Yes, I believe. And just out of the Irish tradition of don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Because the truth of the story is not the facts of whether or not she lived in France, but that that's how we come to know Christ better, going into our caves. As Jesus said, remember, go into your room, your inner room. And that's where we find God, in the quiet and in the caves of our own devices. So that's the truth of the story right there. And they were onto something back in the Middle Ages. They weren't all just ignorant people walking around. They knew a lot more than we do because they were in touch with that part of themselves, the heart, before all the crazy intellectual people took over. Francis de Sales, remember to retire at times into the desert of your own heart. So if Mary Magdalene were alive today, she'd have one of these. She wouldn't need a cave. She'd have one of those little tents. And this beautiful quote I just learned last month from Pope Benedict. In silence, we journey inward, leaving behind the roles which conceal our real selves. In silence, abide and become aware of the abiding reality. I think that's just beautiful. He wrote that since his retirement because this is what he wanted to quiet, it's just to do what he's, probably to write books and be a scholar. I mean, that's where his heart always was. So guess what? He's doing it. And I thought, what a great thing that he did, lead an example for all of us to go to that place where your heart really rests and to trust. I can resign from what I'm doing, and as long as I'm doing what I love, what God has put in my heart to love, then it's going to work out, So, that's what Mary Magdalene did. She, by the way, well, we'll see her later this afternoon after lunch, but Mary Magdalene, because she went all over France preaching the good word, she's the patron saint of preachers. Ain't that ironic? In a church where women can't preach, right? But it's also the same church that has a man as the patron saint of childbirth. So, if you don't laugh, you cry, right? So what Martha did, Mary Magdalene went her way. Martha, she arrived at a town that was being, here she is, here's Jesus and Lazarus, of course, on the left. And Martha is the first person in Scripture to say, Lord, I know who you are, I know what you're all about and why you're here. And so she took that message of knowledge of Christ and took it over to France with her. And she came across a town that was being terrorized by a fierce dragon, a popular dragon in Gallic mythology named Tares, Taresce. And so her approach when she encountered the dragon was not what St. Michael did. Remember, we always see statues of him, he's stabbing that dragon. And St. George spearing a dragon. That's what men do. Women, she took the gentler side, and she preached the joyful good news to it and changed the dragon's heart. And that's the beautiful part of that story. And the dragon went back into town, and the people didn't realize it had been calmed down, and they killed it. And she came into town and told them all what they had done, and in their remorse, they named their town Tarascon after the dragon, Tarascon. And to this day, on her feast in July, they have big parades and processions with dragon floats, and everybody has their dragons. And it's a wonderful story. Again, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. But the truth of it is exactly where we are, again, in the modern world since Vatican II. There are other newer ways to spread the good news, to evangelize. Now, the approach since the Reformation was go out and clobber everybody over the head with Catholicism. Go to every land, go around the world and spread the good news, but baptize them, So that's why we came over here, and people of color were the worst victims of this assault because they were forced to become Catholic in some parts, especially the Southwest, but then they weren't allowed to become religious or priests or nuns or brothers because they were inferior to that way of life, So, but in the logic of the time, that's what it meant. If you were taught you had to be a baptized Catholic to be saved, then of course you want everybody in the world to be Catholic, no matter how you made them that way. And now we're in an age where we've grown up. We don't see it that way. So the new mission work is not to make everybody become Catholic and lead them to baptism. It's to care for them, to set up schools and hospitals, to educate and heal, whether they're Catholic or not. So that's kind of our motto. That's what Maryknoll is all about, the best missionaries out there, and how our thinking is in the new age. So a lot of that's what Martha's spirit was about, It's just teaching people another way, a way of love and mercy, not anger and bitterness and all those things. Francis de Sales said, "Nothing is so strong as gentleness, nothing so gentle as true strength." I forgot to mention in that initial picture with the flowers shooting up that my dear friend Liz, she's 83 now, she lives in the Cascade Mountains. I know her from the Grunwald Guild, that place you heard about. She was one of the founders. She and her husband started the guild 35 years ago. And she's out hiking every morning with her dogs and knows all the wildfire. I hike with her when I go out in the summers in the morning. What I call a hike. Baby steps to her, but there we are. But she knows all the wildflowers of Washington State and the mountains. And she pointed to one once, the one that I put in the first picture, but this is similar. And she said, yeah, that's the first flower to come up in the winter, so up through the ice and snow. And she said to me, can you imagine the strength it takes for something so delicate and fragile to push its way through icy ground and snow? And that was where she saw God at work, this mixture of gentleness and strength at the same time. That when we calm down, take a deep breath, we can do it. One tiny step at a time. There's no rush. But we're always in a rush, aren't we, in our world? We want things yesterday. And so that's what that gave me a whole new me. I've heard this saying for years and years, but as soon as Liz said that, I thought, that's what Francis de Sales was saying. I guess, he grew up in the French Alps, so he kind of knew his way around these flowers that pushed their way through the snow. The old Irish said, go to the place of your greatest fear, and there you will find your greatest strength. And one of my favorites, St. Elizabeth Seton. We must be careful to meet our grace. If mine depends on going to a place to which I have the most dreadful aversion, in that place is a state of grace waiting for me. That almost makes you look forward to going to these places we fear to go to, doesn't it? Because you're not buying this, huh? Well, it kind of it's if you see it this light, it's kind of like it's a journey, and it's going to be through a rough area, but God's walking with you, the Spirit, and you're going to get the grace you need. As Francis de Sales used to say, God will either shield you from suffering or give you the courage to bear it. And either way, you can't lose, right? And Pope Francis said to people, God can't wait for us to sin, because it's going to give him a chance to show love and mercy and forgiveness. And one of my favorite lines was Martin Luther, if you're going to sin, sin big. You might as well make it a real whopper, because you're going to get the same forgiveness as you do with a little sin. And I thought there's some kind of logic in there, Lutheran logic. Be gentle with yourself. It's unjust to demand something of yourself that is not in you. Francis de Sales. I feel like I have to apologize too. All these Francis de Sales pictures are from the book that I think we sold out of already. They didn't send a whole lot, but you can order them with no shipping charges. So let's take a look at this maternal womb, a closer look. A church without women is like the apostles without Mary, Pope Francis. Merton, we do not hear the soft voice, the gentle voice, the merciful and feminine. We do not see the child who is prisoner in all the people. Now, this particular drawing, was created at the Grunwald Guild, as we heard. I've been going there 30 years. Last summer was my 30th summer. And I told them, I don't want to teach this summer because I do this all year round, and I just want to go out there and kind of relax a little bit more and not turn it into, oh, God, I got to go teach a class. So I said, what I want to do this summer is I offered Happy Holy Hour. And so for a half hour before dinner, 45 minutes, I told everybody, bring wine and beer, and we'll have the same talk I would have given if it was a class. It's just before dinner. At the end of a long day, people were tired of working all day, and handing me beers as I spoke. So probably some of the best talks I've ever given. But it was just a way to just relax and enjoy beauty. Let beauty heal you. And that's the kind of place, that's what happens at the Grunwald Guild. Not everybody's an artist, hardly anybody's a professional artist. So anyhow, long story short, my friend Carla, who teaches mandala classes, and I've taken them many times over the years. Mandala is when you draw a circle and fill it with color and symbol. But 2 summers ago, she said, she said, I'm not teaching mandalas this summer, I'm going to teach mandalas. And I said, what's a mandala? And she said, it's the almond shape from traditional icons. So you'll recall, I just noticed Jesus is over the front door of St. Ignatius Church here as we pulled into the drive. He's in a mandala, right? Which is the Italian word for almond. Now, in ancient Jewish culture, the almond was the most sacred flower, the almond blossom, because it's the first flower of springtime in Jerusalem. And because of the hard protective shell around the inside, that they said that's like a body over a soul, that it's mystical, physical and spiritual coming together, and this beautiful smell, all that, So they're sacred flowers. So that contributed to this whole sense of the almond shape, the mandorla. By the way, I used to call it mandorla until last spring around this time. I was giving a talk outside Philly, and a woman came up at the break, and she said, "I love everything you're saying, but say it properly. It's mandorla, mandorla." She was from Italy, and she was correcting my Italian. So but in any event, it's when you take two circles and intersect them. You can picture that, right? And that's the shape and the one circle in a mandorla signifies the sacred, the divine, the spiritual, and the other is the human and the physical. So it's Jesus. That's why he is shown in that shape. And later, Mary, like Guadalupe, is in a similar shape, But no other saints would get a mandorla. It was just Jesus, because it became a symbol of the birth canal and the coming into the physical world from the spiritual world, from heaven. And that it's all one. It's all one unit. Remember the beautiful drawing that Leonardo da Vinci did of the naked man standing with his arms and legs out. He's standing in a square in a circle. It's the same symbol. The square is a symbol of earth. The circle is a symbol of heaven. And that Jesus was human and divine. And that all of us are touched by the divine. We're not gods, but we have that spirit, that divine energy in us, our souls. So that's what all that's about, this coming together. I want to add here, just so you know, anyhow, Carla called ahead and she said, "Would you do a little guest lecture in my class on the mandorla shape in Catholic art?" I said, "Sure." So that's why I created this drawing in the first place, to help me learn better. I was doing all my research, and I did a couple pictures with mandorlas. And I got out there and I said to Carla, "I cannot wait to take your class. This is so interesting." And she said, "Oh, you can't take it." I said, "Why not?" And she said, "It's women only." I said, "Huh." I said, "Well, can I come in and see what everybody's doing?" And she said, "Yeah, you can come in after lunch, but don't stay too long." She was kind of laughing. She was laughing and serious at the same time. It was one of those things. Because she knew, how she designed this class was that shape would lead women taking this class, hardly any of whom were artists before, into places of deep memory. And it became therapeutic and healing, because they were sharing their stories with each other in the class after drawing and painting mandalas all morning of sex abuse and stories from their histories, So it became art and beauty through a religious filter as healing. And I thought, how beautiful, and it just shows you what doors can open up when we are not afraid to go into the creative, quiet places, into our caves, That's what happens. So, of course, I had to be the jerky kid brother, which I grew up as. And at dinner every night I'd say, "So what went on in Sacred Lady Parts class today?" But it was life-changing for a lot of the students in there. I'm happy I was not there to interfere with that. Be who you are and be that perfectly well. De Sales. He used to say, we spend so much time in life building castles in Spain when we have to live in France, and it's so true. We spent the front half of life is so much about wishing we had someone else's looks or talents or gifts or whatever, instead of just discovering your own gift and being happy with it. Teresa of Avila said, "It's an all pure soul that wants what it has, not has what it wants." There's a big difference there. And Catherine of Siena, "If you are what you are meant to be, you will set the world on fire." Love that quote. And she also used to say, she was a bossy little thing, as you'll hear in the summer course, but she used to tell God exactly what she wanted, and kind of in a demanding tone, not like praying for, it's kind of like, "This is what I want you to do," and boom, boom, boom. And she said she figured that if she had the desire for these things, then God planted to desire her in the first place, so she's just acknowledging that God already put there. And I thought, there's some logic in there somehow in there. So a modern version of this wonderful spirit of women preaching was the late, great Sister Thea Bowman, who many of you know I've done extensive work on, but I've recently rediscovered some of her quotes that I want to share today. So she died in 1990, and just recently, just last month even, I guess it was in January, the Bishop of Jackson, Mississippi, he's going to propose advancing her cause to canonization at this fall's bishop's meeting. So he's planning on making the formal proposal. So we're still a little ways from it yet, but it sounds like it's ready to get going. And he's anxious to do that. The sisters in her community, she was a Franciscan sister of perpetual adoration, decided several years ago to not advance the cause for several reasons. One, they polled over the years and they were split right down the middle. 50% wanted to advance her cause. The other 50% said, we know she's a saint already. We don't need the approval, right? Plus it costs over $1 million to make a saint. Pope Francis is determined to drop that whole thing. And they said she would, if she weren't dead already, she'd die, that $1 million was spent on this when she would have preferred to go into her, education or all her things that she so dearly loved in her own lifetime. So anyhow, the sisters voted as a community to remove themselves from this whole thing, and they said, plus it would mean so much more coming from the African American community whose lives were touched by her, particularly in Mississippi. So that's who went to the bishop, and that's how it's all coming about. So it is wonderful. So here she is with the Spirit. Every time I feel the Spirit, right? That was one of her songs. But I love this quote. I can't preach in the church. Women can't preach in the Catholic Church. But I can preach in the streets, in the neighborhood, in the home, and in the family. And preaching done in the home brings life and meaning to the word preached in the pulpit. And that's so true, this is all part of this new energy, this new way of looking at what it means to preach the word. And what exactly is this word we're preaching? Is it just sticking to, adhering to obeying, pray, pay, and obey, as they say, which was the old style? Or is it bringing love and mercy without forced baptism to people and leading by example? And that's what her whole thing was. She was a fabulous singer, and she saw music as her main means of getting the message out there. So she was preaching all over the country. And one of her favorite lines that she said frequently in interviews, the old folks where she grew up, she always called herself an old folks child growing up in Canton, Mississippi. And the stories, oh my God, of life, as you can imagine, growing up in the Jim Crow South, But she said, you could always tell the mood of people because in her world, in her people in Canton, you could always tell what they were feeling by the songs they were singing on the street. And it didn't matter whether they could sing or not. Everybody had a song in their heart, and it was how they encountered the Holy Spirit through music. So here's, God is my father, my mother, my sister and brother, my pearl of great price, my lily of the valley, my rock, my sword, my shield. God's a God of peace. God's a God of war. God is water when you're thirsty and bread when you're hungry. God's my doctor, my lawyer, my captain in the battle of life, my friend, my king. And she was always saying that those words come out of an old spiritual that she loved, that God is my lawyer who never loses a case and my doctor who cures all my problems. That's the beautiful images from the Deep South, the African-American community in the Deep South. If we trust, teach, help, and reconcile each other, then we can love one another into life. Now, isn't that what Martha did with that dragon? Just loved it into life. And that's what we're called to do. No, nothing short of that. I know that's a tall order, but if you are just who you are, using the gifts that have been given you uniquely, that's how we change the world and the church. That's why we don't abandon. I need your gifts, and you need my gifts, to keep on moving forward. And that was her message her entire life. She used to tell, especially kids, God gave us 5 fingers for a reason, to remind us there's 5 kinds of people in the world: white, black, brown, red, and yellow. And you mustn't leave home without your hands or you'll forget one of God's children. Maybe I'm not making big changes in the world, but if I have somehow helped or encouraged somebody along the journey, then I've done what I'm called to do. So it doesn't matter if your mama's in prison or on drugs, you're a child of God. And that all children of God demand love and respect. And we're into that these days in this multicultural church that's changing colors right before our eyes, you know. I know of a woman in Virginia at the parish where I did this communion breakfast who has switched parishes because she was going there for years and years and years, the old one, because the pastor put out something in Spanish and English. So she switched parishes because, we're all going Spanish now? You know, it's just, that's the attitude of a lot of people out there. It's like, so that's who I was talking about at this communion breakfast. It's like, how do you come to communion? How do you come to Mass what is it you're coming for? I don't get it. And that's the old style, the coming out of, I've never understood that Sunday obligation term, even when I was a kid. But if you're going out of Mass out of obligation, then you're missing the whole thing, you know? It's a shame. But there's got to be more to it than that, and that's what Thea Bowman stood for. Now, she lived at a time and in a culture where if a black Catholic, up until 1965, if a black Catholic went to a white Catholic for Mass a church for Mass on Sunday, they had to stand in the back of the church behind a stanchion. And after all, remember everybody knelt at the altar rail in those days. After all the whites had got their communion, and then the priest would come to they couldn't go forward to get communion. The priest would come to the back of church. This was until 1965. That's our lifetime. And that's still the old church that some people, you know, I think we're way past that, hopefully, in the church at large. But this is the reality. And so for someone to emerge from that, to convert into this faith, number one, and then to say things like this, it's like she's leading. There's something here that we need to be paying attention to. I met a woman when I went down. I stayed right in Thea Bowman's home, and they had it set up that her childhood friends spoke to me in the morning and shared their stories, and then in the afternoon, women who were educated by her. And one woman left. She was going to school and to get her PhD in Minnesota, and she said, I came home for the weekend just to share with you. She said, if I didn't have her as my teacher in 5th grade, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. You know, she just broadened everybody's mind and horizon. But I remember one morning one woman in that morning session told me that years ago, one day she was out shopping, and it was a blistering hot day, and she said, I just stopped in Sacred Heart Church for a little visit to just relax on my way home. Carrying her bags and all that. Sacred Heart was the white church. And she said she was kneeling there praying, and a woman came up and tapped her on the shoulder and said, excuse me, but we've provided a perfectly nice place in the back of church for you people to pray. That was the reality of the world in the United States. And do you know what? It's even more frightening is the huge spike in the last year and a half, I'm not mentioning names, in racial intolerance and crimes of hate crimes. It's so alarming. If we think this was all over, we still have a whole lot of work to do. But you can't do the work of God until you love yourself first. And that was Thea's message. She said, God didn't give you a light to sit on it. He gave you that light to spread it around the world, whatever your unique light is. So she developed breast cancer, and she didn't let that hold her back, even when she was in a wheelchair, when she went into a period of remission and was interviewed on 60 Minutes by Mike Wallace. And it was one of the most watched episodes ever. They reran it 3 times. It's now available, I'm told. I haven't looked, but on YouTube, but it took years to get it there. But in any event, it's when she was in this period of remission. She was 47 when she found out she had breast cancer. And she said, I'm going to live till I die. And she found that out in the same year that her mother died and her father died, all within 1984. But she wasn't going to, she said she wanted to die on stage preaching and teaching, and she used to give workshops to priests on how to preach the word in the African-American style. Put a little energy into it, she'd say, because there's so much bad preaching going on in our church. And so she brought her gifts to that. But anyhow, Mike Wallace says to her, Sister Thea, he said, why, this was 1987, why aren't there more of you in the world? The world needs so many more Thea Bowmans, Sister Theas. And she said, oh, Mike, she said, you ask anybody, any of my friends, and they'll tell you one is more than enough to deal with. And he said, well, what is it keeps you going? And she said, every morning I get up and I look in the mirror and I say, black is beautiful. And she said, I want to hear you say it, Mike. She's preaching to Mike Wallace. And he says, black is beautiful. And he asks her another question, and she answers it politely, but then says, I'm still waiting to hear you say black is beautiful like you mean it. And she has him say black until he has a little enthusiasm around it. And people at 60 Minutes told the sisters after the fact that in the editing room in New York, they were like, oh, he's not going to, because he went down there for like 40 hours of interviewing that had to be reduced down to 15 minutes. That was the one thing he insisted on being in there. They were afraid to put it in because they said he was very much a prima donna, apparently, Mike Wallace, and always demanded, to look good. It's the only time they could remember he wanted the person he was interviewing to look better than him. And he wanted that in there. Then he says, what are things changed here in Canton since you were a little girl? She said, let's go for a walk. And it shows them walking out of her house, and they go to the cemetery up the street. And there's a beautiful cemetery and a guy on a tractor, cutting the lawn. And she said, isn't this nice? He said, yeah, it's lovely. And she said, let's go around the hedge. And it's trash cans and weeds. She said, that was the white cemetery. This is the black cemetery. She said, so you tell me how much has changed since I was a little girl in Canton. And then she goes on to say, a lot has changed. And we've made great strides. She said, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's where I come in as a Franciscan. She starts right there in 60 Minutes talking about being a preacher and a troubadour of the Lord and living with joy, not anger and bitterness and revenge and all those things that hold us back from being our best selves. Remember who you are and whose you are, she said, And so this is how Thea Bowman was, in my mind, a modern-day Catherine of Siena, addressing the needs of the time of reform, exactly what we need in this time of reform. The ability to take traditions and see beyond them, see beneath the surface. Don't we say it at Mass every week? All that is seen and unseen, or, well, I used to say it. Now, what is it? All this consubstantial do-fall stuff. I'm still not used to it. All that's visible and invisible, right? And you know why they did that? Don't get me off on that tangent. I still have to pick up the missalette because the words just don't dance off your tongue, But the cardinal in charge of that whole thing said that we had to be closest to the original Latin. It's like, excuse me, I don't think Jesus spoke Latin at the Last Supper. Isn't that what we're supposed to be? If anything, let's go to Aramaic, But I don't know, this whole thing about clinging to, this is how we've always done it. That's not, don't go forward that way. Anyhow, so she turned her illness into preaching and ministry. She started doing things from a wheelchair. She gave a speech once, I didn't put the picture in, but she was being given an award at the same time as, is it Art Rooney, owns the Pittsburgh Steelers? And he was being given an award too, and she was up first in her acceptance speech. He had never heard of the woman in his life. And she gave this incredible acceptance speech, and he thought, oh my God, I don't even want to go up there now when I have to accept my award. And he went up and he was like, thank you, this is nice. And he just felt like he forgot but the next day he sent her a wheelchair. And she used that the rest of her as a gift to honor her. And she called it her Steeler-mobile. And it's now in the archives of the Sisters' Mother House. They have a whole special room in their archives just for Thea Bowman related material. So they're getting ready for her cause. But anyhow, so this painting, I'm including it here, is here at Boston College. So go visit it. It's in the Thea Bowman Multicultural Student Center. I think that's the official name for it. The Ahana Center. And they commissioned this image of Thea several years ago. If you can't read it in the back, it says, the gift you have becomes a gift for humanity. But I love this quote. She was asked in an interview not long before she died, how do you deal with sickness, your illness? And she said, I'm more at peace. I love people. People have love for me. The love they have shown me during my illness, their human love, is somehow a manifestation of the love God bears me. Because I'm sick and needy and dependent, people are more willing to tell me that they love me. And I'm more willing to tell them that I love them. The love between us is healing. So her last speech was to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in 1989. They had been after her for a while to come speak at their annual meeting. And she kept saying, I'm sick, I can't do it. Well, this time she went into a period where she was feeling pretty good. When the cancer returned after her remission, it was invaded her bones. So she was in agony all the time. In fact, I used to tell crowds before her speeches, do not try to hug her afterwards because it causes her, even the slightest touch caused great pain. But people, being people, would go up and hug her, you know, even if her chair was on the stage, they'd hug her legs and to commend her. And somebody said to her once, that causes you such pain, why do you let people do it? And she said, in all his suffering, Jesus never said a mumbling word, so who am I? But in any event, the bishops were after her, and she said, I'm not well enough. Finally, she said she was having a good spell, and she said, she told her friend, Sister Dorothy, Dort, they call her, who was her gatekeeper, secretary, nurse, best friend. She said, call those bishops and tell them I'm going to come. I'm feeling pretty good. Well, Dort told me the day came, and she was in agony. She had this down spell, and she said, I promise them I'm coming. I'm not going to back out. So she said everything went wrong that could. The plane was delayed, air conditioning was broke in one place or another. So then we arrived at this big auditorium, 500 bishops sitting there, and they hadn't provided handicapped accessibility onto the stage that she had to speak. And they had 4 guys lifting her in her wheelchair onto the stage, and they wheeled her over to the microphone, and she just started singing, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. And she had those bishops in the palm of her hand, and she gave a 45-minute speech after that she afterwards said to Dort, that was pretty good, wasn't it? And she said that it's the best one that I've ever given, you know. And she had those bishops crying and laughing. You can see it all on video. I'm told that too is now on YouTube, so Google it. But I haven't. But at the end of her speech, she said to them throughout, you are the ones who, without judgment or anger, she wasn't finger pointing, she was just saying, you're the very ones who have always told us we're a family in church. Why aren't we acting more like family? She said, we're all isolated. We have clergy, lay people, women, men, black, white, bishops. And she said, let's all get in the same room. That was kind of the subject of her talk. Then she went around the world at that time, El Salvador, and talked about the trouble spots and how the church is there to help and heal. Well, at the end of her speech, she starts singing, We Shall Overcome. And they start joining in. And she kind of looked startled. And she went, oh, well, if you're going to sing along with me, then let's do it like we did back in the day during the marches. And she said, stand up. And you can hear her saying to them, you got to move together to do this. She said, join hands like this. And they start swaying, 500 bishops of the church, and singing, We Shall Overcome. And at the end of her speech, they presented her with a dozen roses, and she held them up in the air and said, I accept these roses in honor of all the women who nurtured you into the episcopacy. Your mothers, your grandmothers, your aunts, your friends, that's why you are who you are. And they were crying their eyes out. Her biggest fan, one of her biggest fans, was Cardinal Law, who they met in Mississippi when he was down there doing a lot of civil rights work and passionate about that. He once said, that his biggest regret, until later, was that he didn't have Sister Thea preaching at the seminary in Boston, because he said she was the finest preacher in the country. So, anyhow, that's what we see in this picture here. It's called Wade in the Water. Even though she was in a wheelchair, she had those guys. I've met several bishops who were there. I don't think there are any left now who would have been there in 1989. It's a whole new crop. But anyhow, the couple that I met over the years, I said, were you there? And the one guy said, I have never forgotten it. He said to me, Mickey, he said, to look around that room, he said most of those guys wouldn't show an emotion if that was their own mother on the stage. And he said, she had them crying and laughing. He said there was like electricity in the room. And he said, every year since, before every bishop's conference, I pray, please send us another Thea Bowman experience. And he said, it hasn't happened since. But he said, I'm waiting. And then after one of my talks in Maryland, Tom Roberts, some of you know that name from the National Catholic Reporter, he came up after my talk. It was a Thea Bowman presentation. And he said, I just have to tell you, he said, I was there. And he said, I had a report on it for the National Catholic Reporter. And he said, to this day, it is the most powerful thing I've ever experienced as a journalist. And he said, what you didn't see in the video is as they were wheeling her out of the auditorium, the bishops parted. He said it was like the passing of the Red Sea. And they wheeled her wheelchair right through these bishops. And he said as their wheelchair was coming in front of them, they were genuflecting. And I started crying. I said, I've never heard that. And he said, I turned to the guy next to me, another journalist, and said, we're looking at the future of the church. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, I still believe it. He said, we're in this ugly, messy time right now. He said, but I firmly believe I was being given a glimpse of what's waiting for us on the other end of this. And so that's where I've never forgotten that, and that's what I'm talking about today. That's, if we just go with it and not lash out in anger and hostility and abandon the church, all that stuff, that's not going to get any of us anywhere. We just got to be ourselves, be your annoying self, and be your inner Catherine of Siena or Francis of Assisi or whoever, all the rogues. Always look to the people who were silenced in their day, because they're the ones that are going to be canonized a century later, right? I know that God is using me in ways beyond my comprehension. And Martin Luther King, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. Whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. 2 years ago, the Carmelite Sisters of Baltimore commissioned this as their Christmas card to reply to all the racial tensions that were in Baltimore. Remember 2 summers ago, the riots and all that, and the police brutality. So this was the Christmas card I designed for them. The Holy Family on the streets of Baltimore. I have Joseph in a Baltimore Ravens shirt, you may notice. And Mary, I gave her pink streaks because I just thought that was kind of hip. You just see women with so many wild colors of hair these days. But anyhow, I love the quote. The Word of God became incarnate. We are called to preach that word day by day by day in our homes, families, neighborhoods, to bear witness, to testify, to shout it from the rooftops with our lives. Sister Thea Bowman. So let's take a little break now, and we'll look at the next segment.